Before the marble statue, before the speeches that echoed through history, there was a man, tall, awkward, and uncertain of his place in the world. Abraham Lincoln was not born into greatness. He carved it out of loss, pain, and endless struggle. His journey from a lonely log cabin to the White House is often told as a triumph. But what's rarely seen are the nights when he nearly gave up, the moments when the world seemed too heavy, and a voice inside him whispered, "You're not enough." This is not just the story of a president. This is the story of a man who walked through darkness to find his light. The story begins in the backwoods of Kentucky, in a rough-hewn cabin barely big enough for 2 small beds and a fire. Abraham was born in 1809 to Thomas and Nancy Lincoln. The family was poor, uneducated, and constantly moving from place to place, chasing land they could never quite keep. Life on the frontier was harsh. There was no school nearby, no comfort, and very little food. From an early age, Lincoln learned what hunger felt like, not just for bread, but for knowledge. He would borrow books from anyone willing to lend one and read them by the dim glow of the fireplace. When he was 9, tragedy struck. His mother, Nancy, died of a mysterious illness known as milk sickness. Her death broke something inside him. He later said, "All that I am or ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." But her passing left a hole that no success could ever fill. Even as a boy, Lincoln learned that life could take everything you love without warning, and that pain, if you let it, could either destroy you or shape you. Lincoln's father wanted him to work the land, not chase dreams. Books were seen as a distraction, a waste of time. So Abraham split rails, carried logs, and earned a few cents a day doing whatever work he could find. He was tall, strong, and reliable, but inside he felt trapped. He once walked miles just to borrow a single book, The Life of George Washington. That story planted a seed in him, a belief that one man, even from humble beginnings, could shape a nation. But dreams don't grow easily in poverty. He had no proper schooling, no connections, no money, and every time he tried to move forward, life pulled him 2 steps back. He lost jobs, failed in small business ventures, and spent years wandering from one small town to another, unsure of who he was meant to become. Lincoln's poverty wasn't just about money. It was about self-worth. In his early 20s, he confessed in a letter, "I am now the most miserable man living. If what I feel were equally distributed to the whole human family, there would not be one cheerful face on the earth." In 1835, Abraham Lincoln fell deeply in love with a young woman named Anne Rutledge. She was kind, intelligent, and seemed to understand the loneliness in his heart. For the first time, he felt seen. They planned a future together, simple and full of hope. But life had another test waiting. That same year, Anne fell gravely ill, most likely with typhoid fever, and died before Lincoln could even say goodbye. Her death shattered him. He wandered the fields near New Salem, silent for days, consumed by grief. Friends worried he might harm himself. They called it melancholy, but today we would call it depression. That loss left scars he carried forever. Years later, when someone mentioned Anne's name, his eyes would still fill with tears. But from that pain came empathy. The man who had felt so much sorrow would one day speak words that could comfort a divided nation. The same heart that broke in New Salem would later heal millions. Lincoln's life was filled with more defeats than victories. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois legislature and lost. That same year, he joined the army during the Black Hawk War, but never saw battle. Afterward, he tried to start a general store with a friend. The business failed, leaving him in debt that took years to repay. Still, he kept trying. He studied law on his own, borrowing legal books and reading by candlelight. When he finally became a lawyer, he wasn't wealthy or well-connected. He rode across Illinois on horseback, traveling from courthouse to courthouse, sleeping in small inns, arguing cases for just a few dollars each. But failure didn't break him, it trained him. Each loss made him tougher, more patient, and more understanding. He learned how to speak to people, not as a politician, but as a man who knew pain. By the time he entered politics again, he had something more powerful than money or fame: resilience. When Lincoln finally reached the White House in 1861, his darkest days weren't behind him. They were just beginning. The nation was splitting apart. States were seceding. The Civil War loomed like a thunderstorm over everything he loved. He received letters calling him a tyrant, a fool, even a traitor. He lost friends, allies, and countless nights of sleep. The death toll from the war grew by the thousands. And at home, tragedy struck again. His beloved son, Willie, died at just 11 years old. Lincoln's wife, Mary, broke down under grief. And Lincoln himself, already fragile, fell back into deep depression. He would spend nights alone, walking the halls of the White House, reading the Bible, and writing letters he never sent. The war outside mirrored the storm inside his soul. But even in that darkness, he never stopped fighting for what was right. He carried his pain like armor. Every time he spoke, people felt the weight of his humanity, and that's what made him powerful. In 1863, after years of bloodshed, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing millions of enslaved people. It was the act that would define his legacy, but it came from a place of suffering. He had seen too much death, too much injustice, and he couldn't stand by anymore. That single decision turned a political war into a moral one. He once said, "If slavery is not wrong, nothing is wrong." Those words came from a man who had known poverty, loss, and grief, but refused to surrender his humanity. Lincoln's darkest days became the fire that forged his greatness. He had walked through loneliness, failure, and heartbreak, and each trial had made him more compassionate, more determined, more real. When the war finally ended in 1865, he was exhausted but hopeful. He dreamed of peace, of rebuilding the nation he had saved. He didn't know that within days, his life would be taken at Ford's Theater. But in a way, Lincoln had already achieved immortality, not through victory, but through endurance. Abraham Lincoln's story is not just about politics or war. It's about a human being who refused to give up, even when every reason to quit was staring him in the face. He faced rejection, heartbreak, poverty, and death, but each time, he rose again. When we see his statue in Washington today, we're not looking at a perfect man. We're looking at someone who stumbled, fell, and found his way in the dark. A man who turned pain into wisdom, failure into strength, and loss into empathy. Lincoln's life reminds us that greatness isn't about being fearless. It's about walking through fear and never losing your heart along the way. He once said, "I'm not bound to win, but I am bound to be true." That truth, honest, humble, and human, is what made him extraordinary. And maybe that's why his story still matters today. Because somewhere inside each of us, there's a little of that same quiet courage, the courage to face our darkest days and keep walking forward.